Hey everybody, welcome to the Singletracks podcast. My name is Jeff, and today my guest is Emmy Andrews. Emmy is the executive director of the Central Oregon Trail Alliance, also known as COTA. The group's mission is to develop, protect, and enhance the Central Oregon mountain bike experience through trail stewardship, advocacy, collaboration, and education. Thanks for joining us, Emmy.
Thanks. Great to be here.
So tell us a bit about COTA. What's the organization's mission and how many members do you have?
Thanks. Well, yeah, you set me up pretty well. You said the mission, but I'll say it again. COTA's mission is to develop, protect, and enhance the Central Oregon mountain bike experience through trail stewardship, advocacy, collaboration, and education. We're a nonprofit, and luckily we're a nonprofit that has a good mission statement. And so we basically, our mission kind of sets up these 4 pillars of trail stewardship, which is the biggest one. What we do at the core is build and maintain trails and bike parks, like skills areas. And then, the universe that is around that is really the other 3 pillars: advocacy, collaboration, and education. So there's a lot of advocacy to be done to land managers and that sort of thing. A lot of tables to sit at is kind of how I like to say it, for collaboration to, all the other stakeholders and different groups, to interface with them. And then ongoing education of new riders and just, keeping responsible riding and educating about the lands on which we're recreating. And so COTA takes on all that as well. We do, one of our main funding streams is membership. So we have about 2,000 members, and they pay a relatively small fee to help support the trails. And but we know there's more riders out there. So
right, for sure. So I noticed in your mission statement, you explicitly include the word mountain bike, but the name of the group, COTA, doesn't reference bikes. Is that intentional or strategic for some reason? Yeah,
that's a great question. It's part of the evolution of COTA. Back in the day, we had a mission statement that was more just about trails. And then in around 2016, our board kind of said, what does this mean to us? And, if there was a trail that didn't allow mountain bikes, would we work on it? Would we be the group that maintains it? And we decided, no, that would be outside of our sort of bandwidth and capacity and where we define ourselves. So we definitely welcome, foot traffic is welcome on all of the trails that we maintain, and equestrians are welcome on a number of those trails as well. But we are not the group that does things like taking care of the wilderness trails. There's a different group locally that does that.
Gotcha. That makes sense. Yeah. I mean, we're seeing a lot of groups around the country, some of them are rebranding, some of them are the new groups, and they are trying to pick names that are more inclusive, I guess. And I didn't know if that was part of, if you're able to get more grants and open more doors, because you can say, look, yes, we work on trails, we're, part of the community. Is that play into it? Or do you still work with other user groups as COTA, or are they sort of separate?
Well, I don't know if this is an Oregon thing or what, but there's a very, very collaborative environment here between different stakeholders. So, and there are a number of sort of coalitions or collaboratives where those groups pretty formally get together and discuss common issues. So we have the Deschutes Trails Coalition here, we have the Ochoco Trails Coalition, and that's a place where everyone from grazing permittees to the logging industry to the Hunters Association to the equestrian groups, we all get together and discuss issues relevant to trails in the forest. And it's it's taken some time to build those coalitions and build trust, but it's working quite well. It's really great.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, also I noticed COTA is organized with chapters. So you're a fairly large organization, or is it because it's geographically large? What's the thinking behind sort of having chapters within COTA?
This is another thing that has maybe been around just for a long time, and was a decision of how best to allocate our board's capacity back in the day, but it has become a geographic thing. So 6 of the people on our board, or their titles are actually chapter representatives, and they're elected to those positions separately or specifically. And then they basically run the operations of their chapters. And as we get bigger and as more trails come online, it's actually turned out to be a really good model, because then there's like a sense of locality, and those communities, some of which are like, many of which are smaller communities around Central Oregon, are driving their own trail future, right? So rather than a larger city like Bend saying, oh, we want this trail in a smaller community, that community is telling, you know, sort of the COTA mothership, here's the kinds of trails that we want in our community.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. I mean, and you see it, I know, you know, I'm a member of Mountain Bike Atlanta here in Atlanta, Georgia. And yeah, I mean, we're pretty geographically specific to Atlanta, but at one time, even our group was organized that way, where like different neighborhoods had kind of their own, you know, board member or what have you. And yeah, because a lot of these issues are more localized, and you want to be sort of as close to the community as you can be. So tell us when and why COTA got its start. What was the big moment when mountain bikers realized they needed to be organized?
Yes. So it was a long time ago in around 1992.
Oh, wow.
In the late, yeah. So actually COTA is 30 years old this year. This is our 30th anniversary of,
awesome.
You know, yeah, having a 501c3. We're pretty psyched to have that longevity. So there was a group of folks that were, some of the land here is relatively, the understory is very open. There's not a lot of vegetation. We're in a high desert. So it's pretty easy to kind of ride cross country. And so there were a number of folks that were just getting out on their bikes and going out into the national forest and just riding, you know, deer trails and forest roads and kind of started creating these trails. And then through some different relationships, the Forest Service was like, hey, you know, you need to get organized and like advocate for these trails. We need to get these trails on the map in a systematic way and like make sure they're not going through sensitive habitat and this kind of thing. And so COTA was born to basically have that relationship with the land manager.
So how long have you been with COTA, and how'd you get involved?
I joined COTA's board of directors in 2016. They were just sending out emails saying, run for the board of directors. And I really had no knowledge about trail work or anything. I just was at a place in my life where I was like, this could be fun. So I ran for the board, I got on the board, and then just kind of, you know, came up through the ranks. And then when we were having conversations around 2020 of like, we should hire staff, because we were all volunteer until then. And we were like, we cannot do all the things that we are called upon to do in an all volunteer capacity anymore. So we made a decision to hire an executive director and went through a long process and did make it to the top and got chosen. So the rest is history. Discarded my previous career and said, trails is my new career. So
was there like any overlap? Like, did you have experience that like made you well suited to doing this? Cause yeah, I mean, it's a nonprofit. It's a lot of stakeholders and things. Like I can imagine that's something that takes some time to like learn and to get good at.
Yeah. I mean, I think the underappreciated skill for almost any job is actually ability to have good interpersonal relationships.
Yes.
So hopefully I'm good at that. And I also, in my previous job, I worked with a lot of federal government clients and did a lot of NEPA work, the National Environmental Policy Act, which for federal land managers, that's the process that trails have to go through in order to be approved and like screened for environmental concerns. So I had a lot of knowledge of how the federal government works and how they go through that environmental screening process. So that definitely, and their just entire planning process. So that has been pretty helpful to know from the other side. Yeah,
for sure. So I imagine there are always like new trail projects and things like that going on, where that NEPA knowledge and those sorts of things come into play. How many miles of single track does COTA currently support?
We currently steward about 500 miles of trail. We're going through, we're renewing our volunteer services agreement with the Forest Service and have identified a number of trails that sort of no volunteer group is taking care of. So we expect that number to go up to about 600 Yeah. And then we have
Wow.
about 150 miles more in the planning pipeline that, will take years to come to fruition, but we ultimately see ourselves sitting at, 750 or more.
Oh my goodness. I mean, that's got to be one of the highest numbers I've heard for any trail group. It's hard to imagine how you can even keep track of that. There's probably trails that nobody's really been on for years, right? Or are people riding all these trails and you have a pretty good handle of like what's out there?
Yeah, we do. And we have a pretty good handle on it. We definitely get out, and I mean, it's a very small number of people that work very hard, in the final, especially on our Sawyer team, that go and ride all the trails during the spring meltout and get all the down trees cleared away. And then, we have it pretty systematized to sort of make sure that we at least somebody who knows about trail work rides every trail every year and kind of takes a look. We don't get everything done that we'd ideally like to do, but we're working on that.
Wow. That's super impressive. So tell us about some of these trails that COTA helps support. What are some of the more popular ones? Maybe ones that people from outside of Oregon have heard of?
Yeah. Well, the Phil's area network is definitely one of the most well-known ones. Phil's Trailhead is right at the edge of town and goes out to a network of like mostly green and blue trails that are really, really popular, really, really friendly for beginner riders, families who want to get out. So that's a great network that's really well known. And then what we sort of dub the Winoga network is kind of our more blue to somewhat black trail system where you have more of your popular sort of like rock and jump flow trails. We got like Tyler's, Tiddlywinks, Spunner, all of those names are kind of in there. And in that system, there's a new trail called Royal Flush that's just about a mile long so far, but it's one of our biggest jumps, biggest berms kind of trails in our system. And it's new as of 2021. So that's a good addition to that system. And then, I mean, one thing about our trail network is like it's highly interconnected. So you can put together, a 100-mile ride on single track if that's your jam and just kind of go all over without, having to get out on big sections of pavement or anything like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Does that allow for bike packing? Like, could you do multi-days? Are there like campgrounds or things kind of out there in the forest that people make use of?
Yeah, there are a few campgrounds, but I'd say most, bike packers would probably just go for dispersed camps. We actually have the Oregon Timber Trail, which is a long bikepacking route that goes through all of Oregon, south to north, runs through the area. There's a bit of one of the best routes for the Oregon Timber Trail would unfortunately be this trail, the Metwin, where there's still it's really built as an equestrian trail, and there's a considerable amount of equestrian traffic, so it's not officially routed on that trail because we're trying to reduce conflicts with the equestrian group. But there's a lot of it does go through this area, and there's a lot of great places to stop along the way and resupply, and very fun.
Cool. Well, yeah, I've definitely heard of Phil's trails, and I always wondered, was there a connection to like Phil's World? It's a different Phil, right?
Yeah, it's definitely a different Phil. Phil is he's getting on in years, but he's like still around town and taking care of the trail. He and his family take care of the trail known as Mrazek. So he's still a big presence in the riding community. And yeah, we have a lot of trails named after guys who were the original builders of those trails. So we have like Ben's and Marvin's and Kent's and Tyler's. And so that's, maybe in today's world that isn't the best way to name all the trails, but
Yeah. Interesting. So yeah, you mentioned that Phil's Trails, that area is a good spot for like beginning riders, for families. Is there a good mix of trails? It sounds like there is in Bend for kind of riders of all skill levels.
Yeah, it's a good mix, but it is definitely like especially a really good place to get into riding or for people. I had a guy tell me once, he's like, people come to Bend to go fast and far. Like a lot of our trails are, pretty fast and flowy, and you can log big distances because we're not like this trail goes straight up the side of a really steep mountain, So whereas if you're the kind of person who would go on a ride, somewhere that's really known to be very steep and technical, and you might go on like a 20-mile ride, you can easily knock out like a 40-mile ride here. So
right.
It's fun in that way.
Yeah. Yeah. So not a lot of technical stuff. I mean, is there demand for that people in town are like, we need some harder trails, or are people pretty satisfied with the current mix of trails?
I think like anything that's sort of, a hot topic in mountain biking, there's people that want more like easier trails. There's people that want more harder trails. We hear it all, but
yes, we just want more trails. That's universal.
Yeah, right. When we look at the inventory, we do think, and just where biking is going, and there's so many more jumping, and doing those kind of tricks is like so much more normalized in the community, and so we're really looking to try to provide more jump trails, flow trails. Tech is a little harder because it's sort of what the landscape allows in a bit more of a way, but ways to provide more skill progression. We have an amazing resource here called the Lair, which is just a little hillside that has become like a big jump park, and that you can follow the Lair on Instagram, and you will see like 12-year-old kids doing backflips every day, and it's pretty fascinating. So that's great. And then it's not, COTA doesn't take care of it, but our local ski mountain also has a bike park that's open in the summer that offers a lot of more harder technical and big features and that kind of thing. So that's a good resource around here as well.
Yeah, that's great to hear. So who are some of the key land managers and agencies that COTA works with? It sounds like the Forest Service is one of them, or is it BLM that has the land outside of town?
The majority of the trails throughout our chapters is the Forest Service. We have two different forests that we work on, the Deschutes National Forest and then the Ochoco National Forest. So we have the Deschutes has 3 different districts within it, and then the Ochoco is just one district. So we work with all those 2 forests and the 3 districts within the one. And then we do have our local BLM is just one district as well. And we have several different riding areas that are on BLM.
Oh, okay.
And then we have a couple of different riding areas that are on like city and county, and some of our skills areas as well are on city and county. So, and we have a little bit of state park land. So we're kind of working with all up and down the land manager spectrum, which is good.
Yeah. Wow. That's definitely a lot to keep track of, but it also, makes sense why Bend is able to have this tremendous resource, because it sounds like you're kind of surrounded by a lot of like federal lands. Is that a good way to put it?
Yeah, there's a lot of public land around here, which is just amazing resource. It's just wonderful to be able to get out on those public lands and do all the different kinds of recreation. I mean, most mountain bikers are, skiers in the winter, maybe casual runners, climbers, and all the fact that public land provides for all of that.
Yeah, definitely. Well, so Bend is Bend is a good sized city on its own, but do you see a lot of riders coming from out of town to ride in Bend? Is it like a tourism spot, or is it more of a like you just have a lot of local people who ride there? What's kind of the mix of riders that you see in Bend and some of the areas you support?
Definitely a lot of visitors, out-of-towners, probably a lot of those, coming from driving distances, other places in Oregon, Washington, California. But I was playing around on Trail Forks, and they have a little page where you can look at stats just based on the ride logs of the people that are using their platform. And it was showing like 2/3 out-of-towners and 1/3 local. If they just use cell phones, like I have the same cell phone number I've had most of my life, so it would probably peg me as out-of-towner. So I don't know exactly how those stats work, but definitely there's a big out-of-towner population, and it has really changed the character. Well, maybe not changed the character of town, because people have always been coming to Bend for the ski mountain bachelor, but we really see this year-round tourism, and just you drive around town during the summer months, and it's just cars with bike racks and bikes on the back of them just everywhere. So,
yeah. I mean, does that make it tough as a nonprofit, as a group that's supporting trails, that you're building and maintaining these trails that a lot of people are using, but you don't necessarily have like the volunteer base and the financial stuff? I mean, tourism is great for people who own hotels or, you know, restaurants or things like that. But as a trail group, like, is that challenging for you to have such a large contingent of riders from out of town?
I mean, I think it creates some opportunities as well, because we've definitely seen the transient room tax that is collected locally from those tourists. We've seen some of the community leaders work to figure out ways to get some of that money back into recreation infrastructure and maintenance. You know, recognizing that there's a cycle here that needs to go on. So that's pretty new, but I think part of, you know, back to when we were talking about how stakeholders get together here pretty regularly and talk about these issues, we are seeing mechanisms come online to kind of create that feedback loop. It would be great. We as an organization would like to figure out more how to message to tourists, kind of like, hey, if you ride here, like, throw us a few bucks, right? For your, you know,
Right.
you'll go out to dinner, you pay for that, you're riding the trails, like, maybe give a little donation, but in the absence of that, there are some other mechanisms that, you know, help us with some funding with that, just like grant programs and whatnot. So that's good.
Yeah. I mean, that seems to be kind of a common issue, and it's good that you are sort of talking about how do you take those tourism revenues and sort of put it back in, because a lot of the reason people are coming is because of the trails that COTA and other folks are helping to build and maintain. And so, yeah, you got to keep that resource up and keep improving it so that people will keep coming.
Yeah. And it's funny because it looks when you drive up to one of our trailheads, I mean, it looks like such a scene. There's 30, 40, 50, 100 cars there, you know, but you get out on the trails and it's still pretty, you won't see anyone for 20, 30 minutes and people, and depending on where you are, you could go much, much longer without seeing anyone. And like, and when you do see people, I think for the most part, there's always exceptions, but Bend is really well known for just people being really nice on the trails. My brother was visiting and we, you know, stopped at like an intersection and talked with these other riders for a little bit. And then as we're leaving, he's like, did you know that guy? And I'm like, no, I just, you know, talked to him like he's my friend, you know?
Yeah.
So that's a really good, awesome. You know, that's an experience I hope visitors have when they come here, right? Is like just people being super nice out on the trails, and then just creating that culture of like, that's how you treat people on the trails. So
yeah. Well, that leads sort of into my next question about the mountain bike community in Bend. Like, what is a way for people who are maybe from out of town that they could connect with that and kind of experience that? I mean, it sounds like just ride the trails and say hi to somebody and, you know, you're one of the crew. But are there like standing group rides, or are there businesses that are particularly mountain bike friendly?
Well, we have a number of bike shops. I can't even count them all. I don't know. They're in the double digits, right? And like all of those bike shops.
Whoa.
Super friendly and like great places to get information. And, you know, get hooked up with rental bikes or whatever you need. So definitely stopping in a bike shop is a really good thing to do if you need sort of information. I had to Google like group rides in Bend because I don't really know what the group ride scene is, but it does look like there's a number of folks that do that. Especially there's often a lot of like women's rides. Women just tend to get together and want community and like create spaces for that, which is great in mountain biking. What was the other thing I was going to say about that? Cog Wild, and maybe there's another group now, provides shuttles. They have like a really good daily shuttle schedule. So that's a cool way to, you know, maybe take some of the uphill out of your ride, which can be what you need if you're on vacation and you're like riding day after day. So that's and they're a great resource too. The people are all really friendly and will tell you all about stuff in town and give you ride suggestions and that sort of thing. But yeah, I think those are the
ones
I would point out.
Yeah. What about, I'm sure there's lots of good beer being in Oregon. Are there any breweries that are like trail adjacent or like ones where mountain bikers tend to hang out?
That's a good question. I mean, the classic Bend Day, right? Which I still enjoy every time I do it, even though I've lived here like 15 years, is going for a ride and then going to a brewery and having dinner and having some beers. And I mean, you'll find mountain bikers at every brewery there is. There's a few, there aren't really any that are like you come right off the trail and you're at the brewery, but there's a number that are kind of on the west side. And we've had a huge growth in like food cart pods as well that have, a little beer garden and food carts. And in the summer, those are kind of my favorite hangouts. It's like, cause I'm very food focused really. So
yeah, that's a great part of mountain biking. That's like the other half, the other side of the coin. You ride and then you eat/drink. So yeah, that sounds really awesome.
Burn off all those calories and then put them right back on.
Yeah, for sure. So what are you, you mentioned 500 miles of trails, which still I'm trying to wrap my head around that. So what are some of like the under the radar trails that people might want to consider riding? Like what are some hidden gems, maybe some that are like harder to get to, or for whatever reason, people just don't ride them that often? Are there any that you would recommend?
Oh my gosh, yes. I've got kind of a list. So settle in for this. So Madras, which is like north of Bend, about 45 minutes. So the town of Madras has a system called the East Hills that they have just gone bananas up there. It's on city land. And so they've had a little more freedom to do things like wood structures. They welcome e-bikes because it's not federal land, it's city land. So you can ride your e-bike out there. So it's got some cross country. It's got a lot of sort of like features and skills areas. There's a little drop zone. There's a good jump trail. So that's a really fun one. And if you're coming from like the Portland area, that's a bit closer than coming all the way to Bend. So that's a really good one that is an up and comer for sure. And then I really like the Radlands, which is an area, it's on county land east of Redmond. And it just naturally has all these little punchy, like rocky up and overs. And it also welcomes e-bikes. Although honestly, I would be terrified to ride an e-bike over some of those like rock features. But it's a small system. It's probably only like 10 miles of trail, but the rock features are really not something that you see on other trails we have. So that's a fun area to go and practice. And then in Prineville, which is east of Bend, there's a really new, it's just one trail called Quadruple Bypass, and it's like an out and back, and it's behind these data centers, and it's near the dump, and it's like kind of this weird area, but it's called the Back 66 because all the trails there are part of the 66 trail system, but it's on the rim of this canyon that overlooks Prineville and the surrounding area, so it's really scenic. And then there are a ton of wood features, like lower, kind of more like skinnies, where you're kind of technically riding, navigating the turns of the skinny. And so that one's a really fun one that almost nobody knows about. Whenever we put a picture of it on like our social media or something, people are like, where's this? So that's a good one. And then in the winter, we have a network of fat bike trails. It's only 9 miles of fat bike trails, but we've been working so hard with the land managers to try to increase the mileage. And there have been a series of complications that have not yet allowed us to do that. But we have a great team that is committed to grooming those trails. And we've actually started grooming some of them wider so that adaptive bikes can have opportunities to ride those trails in the winter as well. So that's a fun thing to like have pretty much year-round riding.
Yeah, that's super cool. I mean, do you get a lot of snow in town in Bend where like all or most of the trails are covered, or are there certain trails that you can ride pretty much year-round even without a fat bike?
Yeah, in the deep winter, like January, February, March, there's not a ton of trails that are not under snow. Fat bike really one of the main ones. And then you can also, there's snowmobile clubs that plow, larger, like road-sized corridors, but you can ride your fat bike on those as well. So you can get up into some interesting areas on those snowmobile routes. But But yeah, kind of that deep winter. It's time to go skiing.
Yeah. Sounds like you're okay with that. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. But and that said, the Madras system, some of the systems in Prineville, those, depending on the snow year, those may be riding almost all year. But the Bend trails are pretty closed down for the main winter months.
Interesting. Yeah. Cause I haven't visited Bend, but from all the pictures and things, obviously the pictures I'm seeing are from the summer, and it just looks sort of dry and dusty and like, beautiful forests and things, like sort of reminds me of Colorado just from looking at it. And so, yeah, I'm personally surprised that, you get that much snow that you can't actually ride some of the trails in the winter.
Yeah, it's interesting. We just went to Colorado on a trip, and it was very funny because like our highest mountain is right at about 10,000 feet. And yet we have more snow on our higher mountains right now than Colorado has on its 14ers. And I was like, what is the deal with this? I don't really know what that is.
Yeah. So. Wow. Interesting. Well, yeah. And so you mentioned a couple of those spots on city and county land where there are trails that e-bikes are allowed. So I'm curious to know, like, what's the conversation about e-bikes like for COTA? Is there a growing demand for e-bike trail access, or are people pretty much happy with what you've got right now?
Well, that's a question, that we wonder a lot about, because we definitely hear from a lot of e-bikers who want more trail access. They definitely have access to, we have thousands of miles of forest roads, and then, we do have some systems of trails that allow e-bikes, but definitely there is a steady stream of folks, wanting greater access, who we don't really hear from because it's the way the condition is now, is the folks that might be nervous about e-bikes because, they don't call us and say, hey, we like it how it is now, because there's no real reason for them to do that.
They just post it anonymously online and lurk the Facebook comments because, we definitely see that.
Right. So it's hard to judge how many people are going to be concerned, if the situation does change, so that's kind of an ongoing just thing for me to think about, like, how would we measure that? So we kind of know what we're up against. It's definitely been a journey just thinking about e-bikes. And I think as a lot of organizations, the way they felt 3 years ago or 5 years ago about e-bikes is very different now, with them coming online and getting normalized. And, I've had a few opportunities to ride e-bikes on the trail systems that do allow them. And, my own like personal journey has kind of been like, oh, hey, it's just me on an e-bike. I'm still going to yield. I'm still going to be nice.
Didn't turn you into like a really mean trail user? That's what I've heard. Yeah.
So, and it's also, I've also ridden in mixed groups. Like some people are on e-bikes and some people are riding regular bikes. And that is fascinating. And I am not, like a race quality rider. And so I rode in a group where I was on a regular bike and some other folks were on e-bikes, and I couldn't quite keep up, but I was not far behind. Right. So, my own personal journey has been understanding, that when we talk about like top speeds of e-bikes, that doesn't necessarily mean like everyone's going 20 miles an hour all the time. Right. So,
right.
So that is one thing. And then, COTA is a lot of voices, right? So I wouldn't say that COTA right now has like one position, because there are a lot of voices. A lot of people are at different places with their own thoughts about e-bikes. But, to me, at the end of the day, e-bikes are a user group, just like equestrians are a user group, hunters are a user group. And like, if they feel they're looking for a particular recreational opportunity and they're not being provided that, then, that's a question that land managers have to look at just the way they would any user group. Right. So, and not to go like deep into the policy, which if we went too deep into it, I would get lost too. But both BLM and Forest Service have now put out, they've made national policies that say local land managers can go through their environmental process and decide to open non-motorized trails. So that's something we've definitely seen an uptick since that Forest Service policy came out in our local Forest Service coming to us and saying like, hey, we want to grapple with this. You know, we're the federal government. We're slow. It's not going to happen overnight, but like, you know, and all summer we're going to be dealing with fires and not have capacity, but like, we want to talk to you guys. We want to figure out ways to, you know, gauge where the community's at and like figure out some sort of path forward. So you're at least going to see a lot more stakeholders kind of engaging on this topic, and, you know, what will actually happen in terms of trails changing designations is really up in the air, I think, right now. But it's good to see the land managers really wanting to engage with groups like COTA on having those conversations and, you know, doing what we need to do.
Right. Yeah. I mean, ultimately, like you say, it's their decision, and the Forest Service is a huge entity, and the BLM as well. And so I think the best that you can do, sounds like, is kind of advise and sort of help them work through that. But ultimately it's up to them whether that happens or not, and not COTA.
Yeah. But not to like totally pass the responsibility there. You know, I think our role is to kind of connect them with different users with all kinds of feelings on the subject, right? So that they can hear all sides of the story, and we can, you know, analyze a trail network and kind of say, you know, where, because there's places in the trail network already where there's high conflict between, you know, either people on foot and equestrians and bikes, or even like uphill, downhill bike traffic. And, you know, so maybe some of those places it's like, you know, maybe we want to just not add another thing to the mix here. And then there's other places where it's like, okay, you know, there's some one-way trails, there's not as much density, like maybe this would make sense. So I think, you know, just the way e-bikes are a user group that wants things, like folks that are uncomfortable with e-bikes are a user group that wants things. And so not to live in a world where everyone can be happy, but like maybe we can accommodate both of those groups. I don't know. So
yeah. Definitely TBD, and a lot more work to be done. And like you said, it's not going to happen overnight, but it is good that people are having these conversations now and trying to figure out the best way so that everybody's happy in the end, which that's kind of the goal. So tell us, you mentioned 150 miles of trails that are in various stages of planning that COTA is involved in. What are some of the bigger projects, or the ones that are like closer to being ready to build and to open to bikes?
Yes. Okay. I'll tell you. So there's a couple. Well, I'll tell you also some of the ones that we have under construction now, because those are great, because those are like literally coming online soon. But in the planning stage, it's always awkward, right? Because something can always get derailed. And we have had one of our planning projects that has been pretty derailed that I would love to talk about a little bit, but two that are seeming not super controversial or having a lot of, you know, sensitive resources like wildlife is we have a sledding hill at one of our snow parks that's also like a good parking area in the summer, the Winoga, that we're looking at putting some sort of short sessionable downhill trails on.
Oh, cool.
So the planning process is not totally finished, so anything could still happen, but it's looking really good because they did do some environmental analysis on that area like previously, and it looked good for trails. So we're hoping to see that come online, and cool. That'll be great because we have a lot of popular longer trails there, and then there's a little skills area in the parking lot. So between those like sessionable downhill focused trails and the skills area and the longer sort of forest trails that emanate out of there, Winoga is just really set up to become a real mountain bike hub. And you can camp in the parking lot there in your RV or your tent. And so that's going to, in a few years, I mean, it'll take a few years to get that online, but that's going to be a very cool area. And there's another one, a connector trail that right now it's just a place in the system where you have to ride a long section of road connecting the swampy snow park to the Dutchman Snow Park. We're going to get a trail along that, which will be two ways, which
cool.
will also be good because we have a trail called Flagline that is closed a good portion of the year for elk calving, and it kind of creates sort of a hole in the system when you're trying to get back to town from those higher country trails. And this trail will provide an alternate route when Flagline is closed. So we're really looking forward to that. And just, another trail that is going to be really fun and have more of that higher country feel to it. So those are two of the ones that are in planning, but looking pretty good for actually happening.
Yeah.
And the one that went sort of sideways, which is definitely worth talking about, is this area called Lemon Gulch. So if you Google Lemon Gulch, you will find a number of articles. Kind of basically, it was a trail system that was proposed east of Prineville, and a small group of people became very concerned that this trail system was, going to ruin their way of life and, completely change the town in a way that they were not desiring. And
yeah, I remember reading about this. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So this is not, I would definitely encourage folks to look this up if you're at all interested in mountain bike advocacy, because the story is very interesting, and it completely caught COTA off guard because the trail system was proposed through one of these coalitions, the Otoco Trails Collaborative. And, this was a group of folks that had been meeting for years and had come up with a master plan that included, new hiking trails, new equestrian trails, and new bike trails in the Otoco National Forest, because the Otocos don't have a ton of trail inventory. And there were various user conflicts that they wanted to address by making some new trails and kind of separating users. And so there was a very robust process to make this master plan. And it seemed like everyone was on board and aware. There had been some public meetings at the library to kind of let the public know that this was going on and have the public weigh in on different locations. And then it all just went sideways when this group, decided that it was not to their liking.
And it wasn't like a big group either, right? I mean, this is like a very rural area, as I recall. And that it was just a few, but they were very, very loud and got a lot of attention for the project.
It seems to be a small but very vocal group, and like a lot of these things, it really just seems to be maybe similar to the e-bike issue. It seems to be based on just a lot of fear that the change that the system would bring is going to be a lot greater than in actuality it will be, right? So it's like, this road that you drive on to get to it is going to become like a 5-lane highway with thousands of cars, and it's just like, that's not how it's going to be. Right. But I get it. Prineville is sort of a small, pretty tight knit, more like cowboy community. And they're just, I really think it's forces of change that are going on in Central Oregon in general. That definitely the population here is growing really fast. Like, housing is becoming very expensive. And I honestly think it's those changes that the trail system is just something they can pin it on. And it's
right.
I almost feel sorry for them, because do they really think that if they could just stop this trail system, they could stop all the changes that are happening in Central Oregon? I mean, that of course is not.
It makes me wonder if we've oversold sort of how big of an impact mountain bike trails have on, things like tourism, right? Like I could see that if you're worried you're going to be Bentonville. Well, I don't even know if Bentonville has a problem either. I mean, I think they're doing fine. They're not overrun with people, all of a sudden in their town. Maybe it's more like a Crested Butte or something where, over many years, the real estate values have been driven up, and it's obviously super, tough to get a meal in a restaurant, in the summertime there. But I wonder if we've oversold how big of an impact mountain bike tourism is going to have versus the reality, which is, people are there for a few hours. They come on the weekend. Generally, not a lot of cars. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting question, because to me, trail systems and, the reason certain areas are becoming, why Bend is what it is, and Crested Butte and Moab and you name it, is because there's a really good quality of life there, right? And so I'm not really sure I don't know if these folks are just looking for a different type of life and they don't feel there's a place for that. But I mean, the Ochoco National Forest is nearly 1 billion acres. It's like 850,000 acres. So
wow.
A trail system on like 3,000 acres is, in my opinion, not too much to ask. I mean, they're federal public land. They're open to everyone. And there are a lot of mountain bikers in this area and a lot of mountain bikers locally in Primeville. There's a really strong local culture of, bikers who are very tight-knit group of folks. And it doesn't seem like too much to ask. So in any case, the public comment period for the environmental review will be this fall, we think.
Oh, okay.
And, anyone who is a citizen of the USA, it's your federal public land and you have a voice. And we would love for folks, when that comment period happens, we're going to try to publicize it far and wide. And we would love people to take 2 minutes to just submit a letter. We're going to have draft letters on our website to just say, hey, this trail system is a good thing and you should let it move forward, so that it's very clear when those letters come in that the greater number of folks support this trail system and versus being opposed to it. Yeah,
that's great. That's a great reminder too about these. There's a lot of opportunities like that where we as mountain bikers can speak up and say that we're in support of projects and things. And I feel like we're one of the better groups at that, honestly, like showing up to meetings and we tend to be pretty vocal. But yeah, I would just encourage people for sure when that opportunity arises to, take a couple minutes and write a letter and say, I support this. Like you said, I'm a citizen, tax-paying citizen, and, I want to enjoy the public lands that we have. And that's something we can do as mountain bikers to contribute to that and kind of, show where our interests are.
Yeah. And that's just to break down the mechanics of how to be an advocate in that way is follow your local trail group on all their social media, sign up for their newsletter. Then you'll get those action alerts from them, and then go to the web pages of your local land managers, like the city, the county, the state, and the federal governments, the national forests. They will all have ways to sign up for their alerts, and they are required by law to have, public notification of certain things. So you will get on their list to get notification when there's a chance for you to submit a comment on, whatever relevant public lands things are going on in your, so definitely make sure you're on those lists.
Yeah, that's great advice. Yeah, awesome. So let's talk about funding. How is COTA funded? You mentioned you've got about 2,000 dues paying members. Are membership dues a big part, or are there other funding sources that COTA relies on?
Yeah, well, so funding has been very interesting for us the past few years because, of course, like I mentioned, in 2020, we were all volunteer. We had no staff. So our budget has now we have 3 staff. 2 years later, we have 3 full-time staff. So our budget has basically doubled in the past 3 years. And so we're still sorting out how we sustainably fund that. So membership is probably about a third or a quarter of our budget. And then grants, that we go after that are project specific are probably a quarter to a third. And then major gifts from individuals who are giving, 5 or more figure donations make up probably about a third. And then, we'll have some unusual things like we had a bequest in someone's estate at 1 year. So we'll have some things that kind of come in sort of a one-off way, to fill in some of those gaps. But it is definitely, funding is a struggle. And I really think, I've been thinking about it because, I'm also sit on the board of the Oregon Mountain Biking Coalition, which is like a statewide coalition of groups like COTA, where we all sort of talk about similar issues. And then I am active in some other things, kind of always looking at the broader landscape of trails funding. And I really think what has happened on a macro level is mountain biking started as a sport, not too long ago in the grand scheme of things. And mountain bikers have spent all this time advocating for trails. And now we're seeing that kind of get over this hump where we have a lot of trails and we have places, Bentonville, Moab, Sedona, Bend, Bellingham, you can name them, where the economy and the culture is largely centered around mountain biking. And the piece that we haven't filled in is like, now that we've created these real ride centers, how do we make sure that those areas are properly stewarded so that when you go, the jumps aren't all just blown out and the trees haven't been cut out? And I think that is the next piece in this evolution that like all of the trail groups kind of need to solve, is like how to keep sustainable funding coming in to steward that resource. Because, to mountain bikers, to hikers, you're like, I'm walking this trail in order to go to this waterfall or this viewpoint or whatever. But for mountain biking, like, it's the trail itself, and how it flows and how it's shaped. That's what we're there for. We love the scenery and riding through different types of forests, but if the trail itself is not in good condition, that really affects our experience. And so it's a lot of ongoing maintenance that is not sufficiently funded, not just at COTA, but across the board at this time. But I really hope to see that evolve, in the next few years.
Yeah. I mean, funding maintenance is definitely not sexy. That's not like the first thing, especially, I mean, for individuals, you're giving your money, you're thinking, oh, this is going to go to build a new trail. But, the thing, like, you said grants are a big part of the funding. Are those are typically going toward trail projects, am I right? Or can you use some of those to fund just your like operating expenses in terms of paying staff and that sort of thing? Because it seems like that's the last thing that people want to fund, but it's really the most necessary.
Yep. And that's another one of my like macro big picture things that I try to message whenever I get the chances. And whenever I have a chance to talk to grant providers, I try to send the message of like, I know what you guys are looking for is like a project that you can say, we built this kiosk or we built this trail or whatever, but investing in people, those things have a 1x return on investment. You built a kiosk, right? You did it. But like, if you invest in a person, a staff person, if you invest in training of volunteers, like that money has a 2 or 3x ROI because those people learn skills, they have bandwidth to do a number of things, and that can have a ripple effect out into the community and is a less tangible resource than say a kiosk or a trail, but is a much bigger impact. So if grant providers are looking to take dollars and turn them into impact, in my opinion, that should be by investing in people and training and not so much, and less thinking about just like run of the mill trail projects, Yeah. So where I've had the opportunity, I work into my grant applications, the first few cycles of maintenance and training. So it'll be like, all right, we're going to build this skills area and we're going to train volunteers to take care of it. Because if we don't, it'll be perfect for a month and then it'll just get hammered and it won't be great anymore. Right. So.
Yeah. And you're telling the grant giver, like, we're not going to come back to you, hopefully, for more money because we need to fix up this trail. And, meanwhile, you guys have your name on this trail and it looks like junk after a few years. You're investing in us, like sustaining this and everything. I mean, that's a great pitch and I'm definitely sold.
Great. Well, good.
Yeah. Well, so what is the biggest constraint or challenge that COTA faces in carrying out and growing the mission? You kind of mentioned some. I mean, is it funding? Is it volunteers? Is it some combination of that?
Right now it's funding. We're really blessed with like a very active community and really active volunteers. Our volunteers logged almost 14,000 hours in 2021. Wow. And we're on track to bust that ceiling and go even higher in 2022. So we have a lot of people showing up. I mean, it's like getting people assigned to different tasks and like prioritizing, getting all that organized is kind of an ongoing thing, but I wouldn't say that it's necessarily like a hurdle that there's no clear path to getting over. It's just an ongoing thing of, figuring out how to train and leverage volunteers. But yeah, the funding is really the piece, as I described, that feels like, how are we going to do this? And so many clubs, so many organizations like COTA are figuring that out too. So if anyone's listening and you have figured that out, please call me.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's interesting because, I've spoken with a lot of different executive directors at different trail groups, and a lot of them are in the same boat where they've, just hired full-time staff for the first time within the last 3 to 5 years. A lot of them saying we're previously all volunteer. And yeah, I mean, it does sound like that a lot of groups like yours start to gain momentum when you have that, when you have people who can focus on the organization and the mission full time. And you haven't said it explicitly, but I imagine that a lot of your time and the rest of the staff's time is spent fundraising. So it's that's just part of the job, is you're there to get more money so that you can do more things. And, the idea is that snowballs, and yeah, it does seem to work.
Yeah, it does. It's very much the macro trend, in mountain biking right now. And I would definitely say that, as my personal approach to it is, I hate thinking that there are clubs all over the states that are inventing the same wheel and going through all the same
right.
growing pains. And so, I am more than, if I have developed a resource or some tip for success, I will share it with you freely, no strings attached. So I definitely have people hit me up every now and then of what do you do about this? Or do you have a job description for an executive director? Yes, I do. And I would be happy to share it with your club free of charge.
Yeah.
So, I love to see that attitude among these groups, because we are all making the same transitions to having staff and having to do more assertive fundraising, and we should help each other. I very much believe that. So
for sure. Yeah. And you mentioned that state level organization for mountain bike groups, and again, that's something we've seen in other states, and it seems to be effective, a great way of sharing those sort of best practices and some more regional specific issues and things that can be addressed at the state level versus say all the way up at the national level, with IMBA.
Yeah. And just simple things like our statewide organization got a 20% discount on tools from a particular provider. And then we were able to say to all the clubs, hey, we're going to do this big order, and they're providing us discount because we're doing a bigger order than the clubs could do alone. Go on this website and pick out your tools, and we'll get, wheel organized, getting them delivered and all this stuff. And so just even simple things like that have been so nice to work together on. Yeah,
that's awesome. So tell us what's next for COTA.
What's next for COTA? Well, our 150 miles of trails, that takes up a lot of our time planning for those. Going out and flagging alignments and looking at wildlife issues and, all of that. So that is next. And then a big thing that we're trying to do is grow our volunteer capacity and skills to take care of our flow trails. So, we've had, a lot of volunteers kind of doing, brushing and drain cleaning and that kind of thing. But we really want to create a more highly skilled group of volunteers who are maintaining jumps and berms and, really grow our capacity in that area, because those are the trail features that are just getting hammered and need a lot of love. So we're really looking at better ways to do that.
Cool. Yeah. That seems like something that people would be really interested in learning how to do it the right way. And yeah, like you said, it's a very specialized skill and not something that people just kind of automatically know how to do.
Yeah, right. It takes definitely if, for folks that are just I'm going to come out for one afternoon a year, that won't be that. But we are lucky that we get volunteers who are just coming out very, very consistently. So I'm all right, we're training you to do this,
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, it's fun.
Cool. Well, Emmy, thanks so much for taking the time to chat with us and tell us about COTA and the riding in Bend. And yeah, we definitely look forward to hearing about the ongoing trail projects and what you're able to do there.
Thanks for having me. It was a blast.
Well, you can learn more about COTA and find out how you can support them as well on the website, cotamtb.com, and we'll have a link to that in the description. That's all we've got this week. We'll talk to you again next week.